Did Elvis Presley steal black music? Was the king of rock and roll actually a cultural appropriator? These questions have sparked heated debates for decades among music critics, historians, and fans alike. Elvis's rise to fame in the 1950s happened during a time of racial segregation in America, adding complex layers to his musical legacy that we're still unpacking today. Number 5. Hound Dog. Have you ever thought about who actually wrote Elvis's iconic hit, Hound Dog? When most people hear those famous opening guitar licks and Elvis's distinctive voice singing, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog," they immediately associate the song with the king. But the story behind this rock and roll anthem reveals much more complicated racial dynamics at play in 1950s America. Hound Dog wasn't originally Elvis's song at all. It was written by Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller, two Jewish teenagers who loved black rhythm and blues music, and it was first recorded by Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton, a powerful black blues singer, in 1952. Thornton's version was raw, sexual, and distinctly rooted in black musical traditions. It sold over 500,000 copies, making it a significant hit in the rhythm and blues market. But when Elvis covered the song in 1956, something interesting happened. The lyrics were changed, the arrangement was altered, and suddenly the song became a massive mainstream hit that completely overshadowed the original. Elvis's version sold over 10 million copies worldwide and became one of his signature songs. The controversy doesn't lie in whether Elvis covered a song that was common practice. It centers on how Elvis, a white performer, was able to take a song originally performed by a black artist and achieve enormous commercial success with it during a time when racial barriers prevented many black artists from reaching white audiences. Music historian Alice Eccles has noted that Elvis made a fortune off of Big Mama's song while she was paid a flat fee of $500 with no royalties. This economic disparity highlights the racial inequalities of the music industry at that time. Black artists often watched as their music was repackaged by white performers, who reaped far greater financial rewards. When Elvis performed Hound Dog on the Milton Berle Show in June 1956, his hip-swiveling performance caused a national scandal about indecency, but few mainstream commentators at the time discussed the racial origins of the music. Critics today point out that Elvis's performance style, which shocked white America, borrowed heavily from black performance traditions that had existed for decades but had been largely invisible to white audiences. Defenders of Elvis argue that he always credited his influences and never claimed to have invented the style. In a 1957 interview in Jet magazine, a publication aimed at black readers, Elvis himself said, "The colored folks been singing and playing it just like I'm doing now, man, for more years than I know." He added, "I got it from them, down in Tupelo, Mississippi. I used to hear old Arthur Crudup bang his box the way I do now. And I said if I ever got to the place, I could feel all old Arthur felt, I'd be a music man like nobody ever saw." This acknowledgement doesn't fully resolve the controversy, though. The question remains whether giving credit is enough when systemic racism allowed Elvis to achieve a level of fame and fortune that remained largely inaccessible to the black artists who pioneered the sound. Music critic Nelson George captured this tension when he wrote, "Elvis was a hero to most, but he never meant shit to me," echoing Public Enemy's famous lyrics from Fight the Power. For many critics, Hound Dog remains a prime example of the complicated racial politics of American pop music, where innovation often came from black communities, but profit and recognition went disproportionately. Number 4. In the Ghetto. Would a white man from Mississippi understand life in a Chicago ghetto? When Elvis released In the Ghetto in 1969, it marked a significant departure from his usual repertoire of rock and roll, country, and gospel. This socially conscious song about poverty and the cycle of violence in inner-city black communities raised eyebrows and questions about whether Elvis had the cultural authority to address such issues. In the Ghetto tells the story of a boy born in the ghetto to a mother who already has too many children to feed. The child grows up in poverty, turns to crime, buys a gun, steals a car, and is eventually killed, as another little baby child is born in the ghetto, suggesting the cycle continues. It's a powerful narrative about social conditions in America's urban centers, particularly as they affected black communities in the late 1960s. The song was written by Mac Davis, a white noker from Lubbock, Texas, who said he was inspired by seeing poverty in the predominantly black neighborhoods of Lubbock as a child. Elvis's decision to record it came during a politically charged moment in American history, shortly after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and amid continuing civil rights struggles. For some critics, In the Ghetto represented Elvis's most direct engagement with race in America, and they praised him for using his platform to highlight social problems that were often ignored in mainstream pop music. The song reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of Elvis's most successful singles of the late 1960s. However, others have questioned whether Elvis's performance of the song constituted a form of racial ventriloquism, a white man presuming to speak about and for black experiences he hadn't lived. Cultural critic Grail Marcus has suggested that the song walks a fine line between empathy and exploitation, noting that Elvis's voice carries compassion but also a certain distance. The racial dynamics of In the Ghetto are complicated further by Elvis's own background. Though he grew up poor in Tupelo, Mississippi and later Memphis, Tennessee, his experience of poverty was distinctly different from the urban ghetto experience described in the song. Some have argued that Elvis's own poor Southern upbringing gave him insight into economic hardship, while others maintain that white poverty and black poverty in America were fundamentally different due to systemic racism. Music journalist Daphne Brooks has pointed out that In the Ghetto came at a time when black artists like Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, and Nina Simone were creating explicitly political music addressing racial inequality. In this context, Elvis's foray into social commentary can be seen either as an ally amplifying important issues or as co-opting a political movement that wasn't his to lead. The song's producer, Chips Moman, later recalled that some at RCA Records were concerned about Elvis recording such politically charged material. They were afraid it was too much of a statement, Moman said. This corporate hesitation reveals how unusual it was for a mainstream white artist like Elvis to address issues of race and poverty so directly in 1969. In the Ghetto remains one of Elvis's most discussed songs, precisely because it explicitly addresses race in a way that most of his other work does not. Its legacy is ambiguous. For some, it represents Elvis at his most socially conscious, using his enormous platform to highlight injustice. For others, it represents a problematic instance of a white artist appropriating black experiences for commercial gain. Number 3. Jailhouse Rock. Can a song about prison be fun and sexy? When Elvis gyrated his hips to Jailhouse Rock in the 1957 movie of the same name, the prison setting became a backdrop for one of the most iconic performances in rock and roll history. But beneath the catchy melody and Elvis's Natick performance lies a song with racial undertones that have become increasingly scrutinized over time. Jailhouse Rock was written by Leiber and Mike Stoller, the same songwriting duo behind Hound Dog. The song depicts prison as a place where inmates dance party and form romantic connections, a far cry from the harsh reality of American prisons, especially for black inmates in the 1950s. The playful lyrics include lines about the whole rhythm section, having a band and prisoners throwing a jailhouse party. The controversy surrounding Jailhouse Rock stems partly from how it transforms the prison, an institution with a deeply racialized history in America, into an entertaining setting for a rock and roll song. Historically, American prisons have disproportionately incarcerated black men, a pattern that was already firmly established in the 1950s when Elvis recorded the song. Cultural historian Elizabeth Wieter has noted that Jailhouse Rock appears at first glance to be racially neutral, but when contextualized within America's history of incarceration, the song's light-hearted treatment of prison life takes on more problematic dimensions. The transformation of the prison into a site of entertainment rather than punishment has racial implications that weren't acknowledged at the time. Wieter argues, adding to this complexity is the line, Number 47 said to Number 3, "You're the cutest jailbird I ever did see." This lyric has sometimes been interpreted as a reference to same-sex attraction in prison, though jocker Mike Stoller has said they were just being playful with the lyrics. Regardless of the songwriter's intentions, this line contributes to the song's portrayal of prison as a setting for entertainment rather than as a serious social institution with profound racial disparities. Defenders of the song point out that it was never intended as social commentary, but simply as an entertaining rock and roll number. Elvis himself likely didn't consider the racial implications of the song when he recorded it. The song's enduring popularity suggests that most listeners similarly enjoy it as a classic rock anthem without dwelling on its potential racial subtext. However, critics argue that this is precisely the problem, that the song's catchy melody and Elvis's magnetic performance mask the troubling reality of America's prison system. By the late 1950s, when Jailhouse Rock was topping the charts, black Americans were already being incarcerated at significantly higher rates than whites, a disparity that would grow dramatically in subsequent decades. Music journalist Jack Hamilton has suggested that songs like Jailhouse Rock illuminate the power of popular music to modernize or even glamorize institutions that disproportionately harm marginalized communities. Though Elvis didn't write the song, and likely didn't intend any racial commentary through his performance, the song exists within a broader cultural context of how American entertainment has depicted prisons and prisoners. Jailhouse Rock became one of Elvis's signature songs and the centerpiece of what many consider one of the first true music videos. Its cultural impact is undeniable. The controversy surrounding it highlights how songs that seemed innocuous in their time can be re-evaluated as cultural understanding evolves. The debate about Jailhouse Rock isn't so much about condemning Elvis or the songwriters as it is about recognizing the complex racial subtexts that can exist even in seemingly straightforward rock and roll songs. Number 2. Blue Moon of Kentucky. Is it appropriation to sing in someone else's style? When Elvis walked into Sun Records in 1954 and recorded his version of Bill Monroe's bluegrass standard Blue Moon of Kentucky, he wasn't just covering a song, he was crossing musical color lines that were rigidly enforced in the segregated South. This recording would become one of the most significant in rock and roll history, but also one that raises important questions about cultural borrowing and appropriation. The original Blue Moon of Kentucky was a waltz-time bluegrass classic recorded by Bill Monroe in 1946. Monroe, a white musician known as the father of bluegrass, performed the song in a traditional style that appealed primarily to white country music fans. Elvis, along with guitarist Scotty Moore and bassist Bill Black, radically transformed the song by speeding up the tempo and infusing it with elements of black rhythm and blues. The controversy surrounding Elvis's version centers on how he merged white country music with black R&B influences to create something that would eventually be called rock and roll. His producer, Sam Phillips, had famously said he was looking for a white man who sings like a black man, and in Elvis, many believe he found exactly that. Music historian Peter Guralnick has documented how Elvis's musical influences came from both sides of the racial divide in Memphis. Growing up, Elvis absorbed gospel music from his church, country music from the radio, and rhythm and blues from Beale Street, Memphis's center of black musical culture. This diverse musical education is clearly evident in his approach to Blue Moon of Kentucky. When Elvis's version was released, it caused confusion among listeners and radio stations. As Guralnick writes, no one knew quite how to categorize it. It wasn't country, it wasn't rhythm and blues. It existed in some unnamed cultural space in between. This ambiguity was revolutionary in an era when music was strictly segregated into race records for black audiences and hillbilly music for white audiences. Bill Monroe himself was initially unhappy with Elvis's interpretation of his song, though he later came to appreciate it, especially after the royalties started coming in. Monroe's biographer Richard D. Smith notes that Monroe realized that Elvis had introduced his music to a whole new audience, and eventually even adopted elements of Elvis's arrangement in his own performances. The racial dynamics of Elvis's Blue Moon of Kentucky reflect the broader pattern of his early career, taking songs and styles associated with either white or black musical traditions and creating a hybrid sound that appealed across racial boundaries. While this cross-pollination was musically innovative, it has also led to accusations that Elvis appropriated black musical forms without proper acknowledgement or respect. Historian Lewis Cantor has argued that Elvis's ability to sound black while looking white was key to his breakthrough success. In the segregated 1950s, many white parents who wouldn't allow their children to listen to black performers were comfortable with Elvis, despite the fact that his music and performance style owed much to black traditions. This dynamic is central to the controversies surrounding not just Blue Moon of Kentucky, but Elvis's entire early catalog. Did Elvis serve as a bridge between musical traditions and help break down racial barriers in American music? Or did he profit from performing in a style pioneered by black artists who didn't receive the same level of recognition or compensation? Cultural critics like Daphne Brooks have pointed out that this question oversimplifies the complex cultural exchanges that have always characterized American music. The problem isn't that Elvis was influenced by black music, Brooks argues, but that the music industry and American society were structured in ways that made it much easier for a white artist performing in a black style to achieve mainstream success. Blue Moon of Kentucky stands as perhaps the clearest example of Elvis's musical hybridity, deliberately straddling the racial boundaries of American music in the 1950s. The song's legacy, like Elvis's own, continues to be debated by those seeking to understand the complex racial politics of American popular music. Number 1. A Big Hunk of Love. Was Elvis's image built on black musical aesthetics? When Elvis belts out the sexually charged lyrics of A Big Hunk of Love, with its driving rhythm and suggestive lyrics, he's drawing on a long tradition of double entendre in rhythm and blues, a tradition with distinctly black origins. Released in 1959 after Elvis's Army service had begun, This rockabilly hit showed both his incredible vocal abilities and the complicated racial dynamics underlying his music. A Big Hunk of Love features Elvis at perhaps his most uninhibited, vocally aggressive, and sexually suggestive. With lyrics like, "You're just a natural-born beehive, filled with honey to the top," and the repeated demand for a big hunk of love, the song barely disguises its sexual content beneath playful metaphors, a technique that had been used by black blues singers for decades before Elvis. The controversy around this song, and others like it in Elvis's catalog, stems from how sexuality was racialized in American culture of the 1950s. Black rhythm and blues had long contained sexual themes and innuendos, but these elements were often considered too vulgar for mainstream, white audiences. When Elvis incorporated similar themes and vocal approaches into his music, he was bringing aspects of black musical culture into white American living rooms. Music historian Maureen Mahan has documented how black performers were often criticized or censored for sexual content that, when performed by white artists like Elvis, was considered merely provocative or rebellious, rather than dangerous or immoral. This double standard allowed Elvis to adopt elements of black musical expression while avoiding some of the harshest criticism that black artists faced for similar artistic choices. The production of A Big Hunk of Love also reflects these complicated dynamics. Recorded at Elvis's famous June 1958 session in Nashville during his brief leave from Army service, the song features the Jordanaires on backing vocals, creating a sound that merged gospel vocal harmonies with roots in both black and white church traditions, with rock and roll rhythms. Critic Nelson George has observed that songs like A Big Hunk of Love showcase how Elvis could inhabit the emotional and stylistic territory of rhythm and blues while maintaining enough connection to country music that white audiences weren't alienated. This cultural balancing act was key to Elvis's unprecedented crossover success. The sexual energy of A Big Hunk of Love connects to broader criticisms of Elvis's performance style, which drew heavily on physical movements associated with black performers. When Elvis performed on television shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, his hip gyrations caused nationwide controversy, with many white parents and religious leaders condemning what they saw as obscene movements. These same movements had been part of black performance traditions for generations, but became nationally controversial only when a white performer adopted them. Cultural anthropologist Cindy Garcia has noted that Elvis's hip movements weren't new. They were new to mainstream white audiences. She argues that the controversy over Elvis's physical performance style reveals how black cultural expressions were policed and contained until they were translated through a white body. A Big Hunk of Love reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1959, demonstrating Elvis's continuing commercial appeal even during his military service. Its success exemplifies how Elvis's career was built on bringing elements of black musical culture, including vocal techniques, rhythmic approaches, and lyrics with sexual undertones, to mainstream white audiences in a package that was simultaneously revolutionary. Some defenders of Elvis argue that his sincere love for the music and his acknowledgement of his influences absolve him from charges of appropriation. In a famous 1957 interview, Elvis said, "Rock and roll has been around for many years. It used to be called rhythm and blues." This statement suggests he was aware of the music's roots and wasn't trying to claim he had invented the style. Critics counter that regardless of Elvis's intentions or personal feelings, his career benefited from a music industry and society structured around racial inequality. They point out that while Elvis achieved unprecedented wealth and fame, many of the black artists who pioneered the sounds and styles he popularized struggled financially and remained relatively obscure. The controversy surrounding A Big Hunk of Love and Elvis's other sexually charged rockers isn't really about whether the songs themselves are good. Few dispute Elvis's talent or the energy of his performances. Rather, these songs raise important questions about who gets to express sexuality in American popular culture, whose expressions are celebrated versus censored, and how racial inequality shaped not just society at large, but even something as seemingly universal as rock and roll music. Was Elvis a musical revolutionary who helped break down racial barriers? Or was he a cultural appropriator who profited from black innovation? Can he have been both simultaneously? As we continue to grapple with questions of race, culture, and power in American society, the complex legacy of Elvis Presley in songs like A Big Hunk of Love remains as relevant as ever.